Welcome to the BrainTap Podcast, here to help you relax, reboot, and strengthen your overworked brain. Your host, Dr. Patrick Porter, is the developer of the BrainTap Pro mobile app, designed to help you sleep better, lose weight, de-stress, or kick a bad habit, all while increasing energy, focus, peak performance, and more. Take the free BrainTap Pro Challenge. Simply register at braintap.pro. That's braintap.pro. On the BrainTap Podcast, Dr. Porter brings together a team of experts to share up-to-the-minute news in neuroscience, brain training technology, along with how mindfulness and meditation can be used to improve your life in ways you never imagined possible. And now, here's your host, Dr. Patrick Porter.
Hello, this is Dr. Patrick Porter, and welcome back to BrainTap Radio. And we're here today. We have a very special guest. He's going to share with you a little bit about your environment and maybe some exposure or things that are happening around you that you might not even be aware of. So I want to welcome Dan DeBaun. Go ahead and tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got into this space. And we were talking before we got on air a little bit about your book, about your website, about all those things. So share with us a little bit about what got you into this kind of technology. And first, share your book so they understand that you are the expert in this field.
Well, thanks for inviting me, Dr. Porter. I really appreciate being invited. Really great story. About 6 or 7 years ago, my wife was watching my grown sons use laptops on their lap. Intuitively, she says, that can't be good. I want grandchildren. So it prompted me to think about it. And I actually ran the technical laboratories in the Bell system for years. So I was very familiar with the environment that she was describing. And I thought to myself a little bit, and I said, there's absolutely no question there's emissions. Whether they're dangerous or not, I really didn't know. So what I did was I looked into some of the research, and I was surprised. There seemed to be a fairly significant amount of data that had been around for the last 20 years or so that seemed to suggest there may be some concern over very close exposures to these emissions. I ended up building prototypes for my son of a product that would shield their lap when they use their laptops, and they began using it. Their friends began using it. Their neighbors wanted some more. And so we ended up developing products that actually shield people. At the same time, one of the things that really bothered me was the distance between the research groups and the physician groups, not having an understanding of our current understanding of these exposures and the impacts to our body. So that's how I got the book. I basically, my son and I got together and we talked about what is it that we need to do to help the most people understand the environment that they live in. And that's why we wrote the book, and it's called Radiation Nation.
That's great. Yeah, and I was going to say it's Radiation Nation. I know you can buy it online at Amazon, but do you have a website that people can start to learn more about this as well?
Yeah, I do. And DefenderShield.com, ironically, defending you, DefenderShield.com.
Right. So what we're talking about here is EMF and how it's affecting our body. So in your research, what did you find is happening? Like you kind of shared the story about there with your sons in the laptop sitting on their lap. So tell us a little bit about what did you find out about that? Because people are using this technology every day. I mean, you can't leave home without it. It used to be cigarettes back in the 50s and 60s. People couldn't leave home without them. Now it's your cell phone, your smartphone.
Oh, yeah, I often say, by the way, that's a good point. When I was 12 years old, a little older than you, I used to smoke cigarettes because I wanted to be a big man. At that time, there was no evidence publicly that there was a link between cancer and cigarette smoking to the lungs, right? Fast forward today, it's like, is that the same environment we have where exposures to the technologies around us, is that impacting our bodies? Well, it certainly was true that after about 25%, after about 4 hours, 3 to 4 hours of exposure, close exposure to the sperm, 25% is immobile. So I said, whoa. And there was projections on long-term issues. ironically, there was a study out in Italy 15 years ago, 10 years ago, that showed exposures to women. And something like 2% of that population had problems with tumor in the groin area. And of that, a very small portion became cancerous. So we do have information that says there's a potential for, with these kinds of exposures, that there's bodily harm for the body.
When you talk about DefenderShield, what kind of technology did you develop? Because there's so many technologies out there. So what did you develop that helps these people?
Well, I hate to say it, but I've been around a long time. So when we did a transatlantic connection, the Bell system put a transatlantic connection to Europe, we had to shield the jackets of the wire because the fish were eating it. So we actually created materials at that time that would shield and jacket the wiring and protect it. Well, it turned out that was the stuff that shielded emissions as well. So what are we talking about as emissions? I don't know if I know in the past you've had guests like Jonette and others that talk about these kinds of things, but in a microwave oven, you have a transmission essentially into the oven at a fairly strong level, and that's about 2 gigahertz. It's an electromagnetic transmission about 2 gigahertz. Your cell phone is about 2 gigahertz. And so it's not as strong, but what happens when you have that kind of emission touch a cell? Well, when you put it in your microwave oven, a piece of meat, put it in the microwave oven, you heat the water in between and the cells oscillate, and all of a sudden, voila, you have a piece of meat that's been cooked. Well, the standards for cell phones are, they can't be any stronger than 1.6 watts because they don't want the skin to heat up by more than 2 degrees. It's a microwave oven that's actually being exposed. The power levels are much less, but nevertheless, there is a thermal impact because those signals are thermal in nature, but there's also the biological, as you understand. Biological and it appears is far worse than the thermal impact, and that's what we're learning in the research center around the world.
So when somebody's sitting in their home, is it just their cell phones that are affecting them, or is there other things in their environment that are affecting them?
Well, Wi-Fi. You have your tablet in one hand. You have your cell phone in the other hand. You have Bluetooth being transmitted. You have Wi-Fi being transmitted, and in some cases cellular. So your laptop, your tablets, any portable device you're using that connects to something outside of that device is typically using an RF signal, which is, as we just explained, is a microwave signal.
Okay, so with this microwave signal, let's say we're doing Wi-Fi in our home, is it always on, or what's happening to us? And I guess maybe we should talk about when you're in your home, what can you do to protect yourself? I mean, when I'm sitting in my home and I go to look for my Wi-Fi, I've got 5 of my neighbors, Wi-Fi is coming into my home. Yeah.
Now it turns out your neighbors, although you can see it, is not something you worry about. The energy levels are so low that they're not going to really impact your body and your immediate environment. Your router, if it's 10 foot away or more, is absolutely not endangering you. It's only when the transmissions are touching a body or close to the body. In fact, a good rule of thumb is if it touches, it's the worst. If it's 1 foot away, 80% of the danger is minimized. 4 foot away, 98. That's how quickly, it's a logarithmic function. The power levels drop really, really fast. So very simple. Keep safe by staying away. And if you have something in your environment, keep it far enough away. And at night, which is something I do, for example, I actually have a timer on my router. I just turn it off. So it's just not there.
So when you're working with someone like to mitigate all this in their homes or in their environment. Tell me a little bit about what you teach them through your book, and then what they can purchase on your website. What is it? What are the kind of things we can do to mitigate this radiation?
Yeah, the strength of these signals are what they are. They're not a microwave signal, right? So by and large, everything around us is about the same. So the things you can control is time and duration. If you have a cell phone for 3 hours, I would really worry about it. You know, so the time in which you're using it is important. And then, as I mentioned before, distance. If you're going to use it and you're using, and you're going to be on for more than a couple of minutes, probably best to put it on speakerphone. Or there are also devices that, plug-in devices with earbuds you can buy that have electromagnetic free. That is, they don't conduct the signals into the, as it approaches the ear. And those kinds of things are also good to have.
What is that when somebody's using the earbuds? Do they still get the radiation, or?
Yes.
Okay.
Oh, you would appreciate this. One of the things I've been very, very careful about over the years is talking about the differences to the energy levels of a signal and the impact to the body. Like, again, you don't have to remember the number. 1.6 watts per kilogram is what the standard is for the cell phones. And a Bluetooth is about 2 to 3 watts per kilogram. So I would often say that they're all about, logically, you can actually look at the power levels and say, well, if it's less, it's better. But I never really did that because I didn't know. But some recent study work has shown that 0.1 watts per kilogram can impact a cell, and it can mutate the cell, particularly if you're concussed, by the way. So when you put a cell phone and you had a concussion a year ago, you're more susceptible. The blood-brain barrier is actually diminished and no longer providing that protection to your brain.
Right. And of course, BrainTap Nation really is concerned about traumatic brain injuries and working the brain to balance out the brain and things like that. So when we're looking at time and duration, let's say that we get 4 calls in an hour, but they're less than a minute each. Is that going to impact us, or has it got to be longer duration?
Again, science does not know that answer. Mm-hmm. And so I'm always reluctant to talk about it, but we do know that if it's only very short intervals, well, this is what's happening. It's actually hitting the cell membrane, and it's breaking down that membrane, and when it fails enough, there's a calcium that penetrates the cell, a membrane, and that's what starts and kicks off the DNA damaged cell or mutated cell. So it's like, what irritates the cell and how long does it take is essentially the question you're asking. And when it's a minute or less, we know it really doesn't start affecting it. As it starts going beyond that, then it becomes more and more susceptible. But in general, I would say if you have 4 calls in 1 hour, you're probably pretty safe. If you have 1 call and it's on for a full hour, then I would worry.
Sure. Now, when you're thinking about mitigating the damages in your environment, and there's all these different Wi-Fis now, there's, or even cell phone services, 3G, now they're going to 5G. What's the difference between those, and what do you anticipate happening with our bodies?
That's a very good question. When the standard was created 35 years ago, it was an analog signal. That means the strength of the signal is always constant. Let me give you an example. If you take a piece of steel and put a piece of concrete and you put a 1,000-pound load on it, that concrete will not break. It's a constant load. And that was what 1G was. 2G and up to 4G has been a pulsing digital signal. That is, It's up and down, up and down. Well, if I use the same analogy I just provided about concrete, that becomes a jackhammer. So a jackhammer has more effect with the same power level when it's oscillating. So a lot of the concerns have been between the 2 and 4G, not with the 1G, believe it or not, because of those physics. And that was around 2 gigahertz, right? Like a microwave, around 2 gigahertz. 5G is an entirely different world. 5G can be up to 90 gigahertz. And if you know your physics, that's about a third of an ionized signal. That is, it can knock the electron out of its orbit. It's like an X-ray. It's like an atomic bomb. It's about a third. So all of a sudden, it's much, much faster. And it has not just one jackhammer, it has 2. It's MIMO, multiple in, multiple out. So if you look at this kind of environment, you could say intuitively, this is worse than it's been in the past. But here's the point. Nobody knows. There's been no study work whatsoever on 90 gigahertz. And so there's a real concern, at least I have, given what the data has been in the past. And now with the 5G, where is it going and its impact to the body?
When we're thinking about our environment in general, I know that some people are concerned, like when you see the power lines running right over somebody's house into a neighborhood, does DefenderShield help against that, or is there a way we can mitigate that kind of damage? Because I know there's also something happening there.
We haven't chatted about this, but there are actually 2 forms of emissions. There's extremely low frequency emissions, and that's the stuff that's 300 hertz and below, very, very low stuff. In fact, if you know the household current is 110 volts, 60 cycle. 60 cycle is a reference to the speed of the signal that's being passed through to provide the service. Well, most of everything you see is 60 cycle stuff. So is that dangerous? Yes. Distance is important? Yes. In fact, Jonette, by the way, when she gets close to some of this stuff, she can actually feel it. So the wiring in the walls, if there's a current flow, can generate extremely low frequency. And the other is the RF stuff, which is the microwave we spoke about. In the power lines over your head, generally you're far enough away. But when you have the 10,000 kilowatt wiring, do not live near them if you can avoid it completely. Because you can take a light bulb and you can light it up if you're close enough to it. That's how much power level is there.
Oh, that's incredible. Now, what are some, let's say somebody's out there listening going, well, how do I know if I'm being affected by EMF? What are some of the symptoms that they might exhibit?
Tingling. I was typing on my computer and my fingers were tingling. I have headaches. I'm getting lots of headaches. My eyes are blurry every so often. So these are some of the observable things. But ADHD has been linked to exposures. A lot of the neurological kinds of conditions have been linked in study work. So there's the stuff you see, and then there's the stuff you don't see.
Now, once, so how does DefenderShield work? Because I'm not as familiar as Jonette is about it.
Yeah, well, you know, it's funny. I was telling you about the cabling that went to Europe. Well, you're going to use your cell phone. And when you use your cell phone, you're going to have to connect to a cell tower. So what I decided was the simplest thing to do is directionally block it. So what I have is a shield in our devices that prevents the signal from going towards the body and lets you connect to the Wi-Fi or the cell tower simply by letting it unobstructed. So we do shielding. That's all we do.
Okay, so when they go to DefenderShield.com, they can see all sorts of different shielding that happens.
Oh, yeah.
In fact, I'm looking here at the AirTube stereo headphones. So tell me a little bit about how that works. Because
Yeah, remember I was telling you before you can get earbuds that are really pretty safe? Well, we have them. And what we do is we take the electrical signal and we convert it to an acoustical coupling. And when it goes to the ear, it's air that's carrying tone. So there's no emissions from that device. Something we haven't spoke about is, and Jeanette's been working with this a little bit, is the Blu-ray. We actually have now introduced glasses. When you look at a computer screen, when you look at your cell phone screen, there's a spectrum of light that comes in from that screen. Well, what we know is that the blue component of that, which is about almost as strong as violet's, a little stronger, can actually impact the retina. And when you talk about macular degeneration, there's a reference that blue light is actually deteriorating the retina and emulating the problems with macular degeneration.
Right. Yeah, we find that the frequency between 470 and 484 are the damaging frequencies of blue light.
Yeah, the ultraviolet and the blue. Yeah, exactly.
So yeah, we use blue light in our device, but we use 533 frequency, which is actually healing and brings collagen and gets rid of.
Exactly. It's this phenomena that this spectrum, a very narrow spectrum, that is endangering you.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, I see you have those glasses people can wear if they're using them at night, so they can work on their computers if they choose to.
Right.
When somebody starts using your devices, I know that she introduced me to the flip phone case for my iPhone so that I could use that but have it protected from the radiation.
Right.
What do you see happen? I mean, do you still get the same cell section, or does it stop the signal while it's in these devices?
Well, it turns out that the way I designed it was there's absolutely no interference with the signal at all. All it's doing is absorbing it in your direction. So you can talk, but here's the caution. If you're in the Midwest somewhere and you have one cell tower 5 miles away, and that's the closest it is, because we shield, if you have the shield towards that tower, the cell phone won't work. But generally speaking, it does work because there's so many cell towers. So we know that it will work normal. And at the same time, the most dangerous, which is touching your body, is totally protecting you.
Okay, so let me ask you the question. If you're talking to your sons and you're trying to protect them from EMF, just give me a rundown of what your pep talk is during the day, because people want to use this technology. My wife would tell you I'm addicted to it too, but what would you tell your sons in order to protect themselves against the EMF that our listeners can take away from the call?
If you don't need it on, turn it off. Like, for example, when you go in your car, if you're not using Bluetooth, turn it off. You don't need it. If you're not using Wi-Fi with your cell phone, turn it off. You don't need it. All you're using is the connection. Why did I say that? There are 3 signals coming out of your cell phone versus 1 signal coming out of your cell phone. So you reduce it by 1/3 by simply turning something off that you're not using. And people don't quite realize that is there. When you use it, try to minimize your time. With my boys, they were going to use their laptop whether I said no or not. So if you have children who are using devices, particularly children who are using devices, you really do want to find a form of protection for them with our product or others that may do that. One thing we didn't talk about, we talked about 1.6 watts per kilogram. I've referenced that as a standard. If you were to use that signal can go into your head by about 1 inch. It will heat up no more than 2 degrees. How about a 4-year-old child? By the way, 40% of children that age now have been exposed to use of cell phone fairly significantly, right? That same signal goes completely through the head. And that's not only a biological, a thermal impact we worry about, but the biological as well.
That's great. Well, we're just about to wrap up the call for today, but you've given us a lot of information, a lot to think about. They can go get your book on Amazon, Radiation Nation. They can check out DefenderShield.com, get some resources they need. I know that I can think of a few people I'm going to recommend because they sit with their laptops on their lap. Yep. Whether it be a man or a woman, I would think that it would still be useful to use these. Yep. Anything that we've left on the table, anything you would like to say to the audience that we haven't mentioned already, or something you want to reinforce?
Yeah, I would. When we started off, I mentioned to you, my approach is not to prevent you from using your technologies. That's not going to happen, right? Whatever I tell you, you'll continue using it most likely. So is there something we can do to protect ourselves? Very, very simple rules, and time and distance. And if you are going to use your cell phone to your head, find a device that's shielded and make sure it's one that works. There's a lot of devices in there, but we are not victims. Our environment's not going to change soon. And we need to be aware, particularly our kids need to be aware, because we do not know the impact. In fact, one of the things I often tell is the story about why there's debate about this technology stuff. And I think back when I was in Bell Labs, I actually did a statistically significant study on technology, and I had to predict what was going to happen in the future. So I needed a large population. And after I did the study, I was 95% confident that the data I had was right. Well, guess what? The only way we'll know what will happen to a child is take 10,000 children, lock them in a room, and see who dies over a 10-year period. We don't want to wait for that, right? Be cautious. A little bit caution means a lot of protection for you if you're aware of your environment. And that's the words I think are most important to understand.
Well, that's great, Dan. And thank you for bringing this to the world and making people aware of it. And hopefully through our radio show here, we'll get that out to more people. They'll share it with their family and friends, make people aware of it. Again, we're not saying don't use your technology, just protect yourself. Unfortunately, I think that manufacturers might do this, but the cost factor gets in there, so they don't want to.
That's really the case.
They're trying to minimize their cost, and we want to say, let's maximize our result and do it. So again, thank you. And again, we're going to post into the comments for those listening, DefenderShield.com. We'll put the contact information for you. You can buy the book on his website, DefenderShield.com. Or if you'd like, it's also available in audio format. You can get it on audible.com. So you've made it available to anybody if they like to listen in their car while they drive, or they like to read a book, and it's available on Kindle too. So it's available in all formats. So let's get out there, let's share this with the world, and let's be safe using our electronic equipment. So again, Dan, thank you for being a guest on the show.
Again, thanks so much for inviting me. I really appreciate the opportunity to share my knowledge.
Okay, and listen in for the next BrainTap Radio show. So we're trying to bring you cutting edge technology that will make your life easier and safer to use. And Dan, you're doing your part. So again, thank you. We'll talk to you soon.
This show has been produced by Market Domination, LLC. To discover how you can have your own show completely done for you and turn it into a real published book and become the authority in your marketplace, go to www.marketdominationllc.com/podcast offer.